This is William K. Murtaugh, Mert Witness 1, and this is Tuesday, April 21st, 2020. Now, I'm doing this monologue with the plausible theory that Timothy Charles Holmseth may be an unwitting agent or operative for Russians who are using bots and fake media personalities and so on and so forth to infiltrate American websites, and in particular the right-wing conspiracy theorists that are proliferating. And one group of these people that Timothy Charles Holmseth has found himself in the middle of. Now, I have been tracing various sources of information that Tim Holmseth has been using lately, and I've come across a rather interesting coincidence, and that is most of these people are foreigners, and a good deal of them come from within this Russian Federation. There's a building that I illustrated in the opening to my presentation that is known for housing thousands of professional trollers that skim various social media sites and also passes on disinformation. And they look for people precisely like Timothy Holmseth. These are people that have pretty good amount of followers, and also seems to be able to find people that believe nonsense. Now, of course, people might want to remember the 2016 election, which brought Trump into power, and the prevailing theory at the time was that these individuals and the organizations that hired them, which is in fact part of the government of Russia and other foreign countries that don't particularly like the way we do things in the United States, we're going to do all this to help elect Donald Trump. Now, that may or may not be true, but what seems to be coming out is that these operatives are also working against Trump, because you're seeing information being distributed on the internet that makes people that follow Trump and people that Trump support look like a bunch of blithering idiots. And this in turn, since Trump seems to support people in this category, it makes Trump look like an idiot, and this provides ammunition for what the conspiracy theorists call the deep state. Now, the deep state doesn't really exist. It's a fantasy. And it was probably created by these Russian trolls. But what the purpose of these trolls is to confuse the American public. They know that Americans are fixated on their political belief. There are people that don't like Republicans and Donald Trump, and there are people that don't like liberals and people like Nancy Pelosi, Barack Obama, and so forth. So what these what these disinformation groups are doing is they're going around finding operatives or potential operatives within these groups that they can exploit. And they choose people that are willing to accept information without fact-checking, double-checking, or even triple-checking. And people like Tim Holmseth fall into this category, as Tim Holmseth takes information that he believes he can use to push his agenda of this pedophile task force and all this other baloney that he distributes out there. And it has to make one wonder if he is, in fact, being manipulated by people like this. Because he craves attention, he seems to be getting money from somewhere, and he's duplicating propaganda that is being spread by some way out people that also do not check their information. And the recent development with the children with this rather unique cancer seems to fall into that category. Uh, Tim Holmseth got this information from somebody within his network that provided this information, and Tim, in his normal fashion, embellished things and added his spin to it and then redistributed it on his social media quote unquote empire. So, this is yet another example of how Tim Holmseth exploits information for his own purposes without verifying that information. Now, how you combat something like this is something that I don't know how to advise. The people that follow Tim are easily susceptible to this kind of fraudulent information, and they are not going to change. Uh, at best, all we can do is hope to contain this sort of thing and get the information out there to people that will be responsible enough to double and triple check what Tim Holmseth writes to prevent this kind of disinformation from being spread to a wider audience. And another thing I would advise is to those who are Trump supporters. Understand this. People like Timothy Holmseth who support Donald Trump make him look bad. It makes him look like an idiot because Tim Holmseth has managed to associate himself with Donald J. Trump in a fictitious fashion, and people from the other side are going to see this and say, look at the kind of people that Donald J. Trump attracts. People like Timothy Holmseth, people like the guy that pretended to be JFK Jr., people that believe in Martian or child sex colonies on Mars, people that believe that there's this vast operation going on by the military, going on and blowing up tunnels and stuff. They're going to look and they're going to say the followers of Donald J. Trump are nuts. And I would not be the least bit surprised if this stuff starts turning up in Democratic campaign ads where they are showing that Donald J. Trump is attracting the bottom feeders of society. So if you support Donald Trump and you want him elected, you need to start disavowing Tim Holmseth and the kind of people that he has surrounded himself with. Because Tim Holmseth may well cost you the election. And this might be exactly what the foreign agents want. Because if these foreign operatives were here to get Donald J. Trump elected, then they elected the wrong man in certain eyes, because now maybe they're realizing that they should not have had Donald J. Trump in office. He is somebody they cannot manipulate. He has outmaneuvered them, and especially China, who has also been on this little operation. Now he's turning against China, and it may be to Russia's benefit that Joe Biden be elected president. And so by having the operators affiliate themselves with the likes of Tim Holmseth and feed him information which they know he will exploit, they may turn the tide against Donald Trump and towards Joe Biden. Because Joe Biden is a known commodity, they probably can handle Joe Biden better and at least work with him, and so on and so forth. And so, they will seek out people on the left and do the same thing even more, using Tim Holmseth as a bullet point, saying, hey, look at this guy over here spreading this false and weird information. And, this is the kind of person your president supports. Are you going to elect a president that supports these kind of people? And, of course, the answer is going to be no. And all of a sudden, Donald Trump may find himself losing the election. Because you have to understand something. Russian operatives, trolls, agents, whatever you want to call them, they're not out to support Donald Trump, and they're not out to support Joe Biden or whoever we finally nominate on the Democratic side. They are out to cause confusion, havoc, and discourse within the United States. And that's exactly what they're doing. And people like Timothy Charles Homseth are making matters a whole hell of a lot worse. And so as long as people keep supporting Timothy Charles Homseth, regardless what their point of view is on the Democrats, they are making matters worse for their guy more than they would be making it worse for the Democrats' guy. Simply because of what I have presented as a possibility that the confusion can be worked to go against Donald J. Trump. And that if we can't return to an honest debate, honest discourse, honest disagreement, and so forth, this country is going to go to hell in a handbasket. And we will have no one else to blame but ourselves because we have listened to the likes of Timothy Charles Homseth and this fake Pentagon pedophile task force. Now ask yourself this. Where is Tim getting his funding from? Now, the prevailing theory was he was getting the funding from this woman in Wisconsin. Well, there's a little problem here. This woman is not exactly financially solvent. Number one, she filed bankruptcy in 2017 to discharge $100,000 worth of debt. And second of all, she's in an industry that is suffering dearly because of this pandemic. Real estate right now is not the best industry to be in. In fact, it's probably the worst. Nobody's buying houses because they're extremely expensive. It's very difficult to rent because people can't pay rent because they don't have jobs, or else if they have jobs, prices have gone through the roof to where they can't afford to buy things. And so you've got people running around trying to figure out how they live their daily lives, and they're not going to be able to buy houses or rent expensive apartments. They're going to start moving in with family members and grouping up, so to speak, in the months and weeks to come. Weeks and months to come. I got it backwards, but same point. They're going to figure out ways to economize, and it's going to be a disaster for the real estate industry. If you don't have a job, you can't afford to go out and buy a $250,000 house. And you certainly can't go out and rent a $1,000 a month apartment. It's not going to happen. People have lost their jobs. It's taken forever to get unemployment. Most of the people have not gotten their so-called stimulus check, which is only a one-shot pony anyway. And so real estate is not the place to be right now. And so that would mean that the rumor of Tim Homseth getting funding from that source is not true. And Tim is not making enough money on his social media accounts to support this gallivanting around. So the question has to be where the money is coming from. There's the old expression, follow the money. Well, this is what needs to be done here. We need to figure out where Tim Homseth is getting his money. Because gas costs money. It may be cheap, but it still costs money. And Tim Homseth is running around the country in that car. The car needs to be maintained. It's going to need oil changes. It's going to need tires. It's going to need this. It's going to need that. And Tim Homseth has to eat. Even if it's junk food, he still has to eat. And unless he's going to stand out in the thunderstorm and let the rain shower out on him, he's going to have a place to go and take a shower. I know the rumor is he doesn't take it very often, but, those times he needs to take a shower, he's got to go somewhere. And he has to maintain his computer, internet access, all kinds of stuff. He may not be paying for his internet access, but he has to maintain the computer. So there are expenses involved. Minimal, perhaps, but there are expenses. And so he's getting this money from somewhere. And he's also getting all this information. And something else I've noticed. Um, Over the years, I have watched Tim Holmseth do his webcasts. And the one thing I've noticed is he's not been very sophisticated with his graphic arts talents. Uh, and he's gotten quite expert at software editing, graphic editing of the um, images he uses when he does his headlines and so on and so forth. And I'm beginning to believe that Tim Holmseth is actually getting help with all that. That he may write the little articles and everything and then send it off to someone who does the final editing and puts the stuff up on his social media sites. I really don't believe that Tim Holmseth is a one-man band. If he is, more power to him, but I have my doubts based on my personal experience with editing software and understanding just how sophisticated and time-consuming it is to create these various articles and presentations on YouTube. He's using Facebook to create his mobile videos, but somehow these videos are getting on YouTube. And it's not an easy thing to take videos from Facebook and put them over onto YouTube. That means that he is either uploading this material under the high command username, which is in violation of YouTube, or somebody is doing it for him. He sends this material off to his handler, and the handler then turns the stuff over to YouTube. And if anybody watches his mobile streams that he does, you will notice that he's a little sloppy when he does his mobile streams. He struggles to get it on the air. He has to put up with the Facebook ads that come up when he's doing his video presentation, this is one reason I personally don't use Facebook, because it's a sloppy way to conduct an interactive chat. You get these ads splattered all over, and it's a useless thing to be using. And so I think that Tim Holmseth is not sophisticated enough to do most of what he's been doing on his social media sites. The TimothyCharlesHolmseth.com website. I think that is being run by an administrator that is doing all the heavy work. Tim may supply the basic article, like you see in the body of whatever he puts up, but as far as the graphics, the formatting, the way the whole thing is presented with hashtags and so forth, I think there's somebody in the background, one or more persons, that is handling this. And this would point to possibly somebody influencing Tim through a connection that originates in a foreign source. If you look at some of the conspiracy theorists that Tim Holmseth hangs around with, David Strait, this Juan character, some of the other clowns that have been surrounding Tim for quite a while, you begin to understand that Tim is basically a puppy being led on a leash. That he is told what to say or fed information that they know he will say they want it said, and he will dutifully obey and put this material up on the internet. So in closing, I would suggest that everyone, no matter what political side of the rainbow you're on, you need to take a good and long, hard look at what Tim Holmseth is doing. And ask yourselves, is Timothy Holmseth doing Donald J. Trump any good? Or is he just making matters for Donald J. Trump worse? I would suggest that Donald J. Trump is not being done any favors by having someone like Timothy Charles Holmseth on his team. Um, I'm assured that Donald J. Trump never heard of Timothy Charles Homestead, nor would he support someone like Timothy Charles Homestead. But because of skills being brought to bear as far as propaganda, this seems to be the case. So look at it from that perspective, examine things, and make damn sure that you come out with the correct interpretation of what's going on rather than just say that, well, because Tim Homestead defends Donald J. Trump, I defend Timothy Homestead. It may be a fatal mistake. This is William K. Murtaugh, Mark Witness 1. Have a good one.